Found stories. The Battle of Johnstown was difficult. Every day the people stood outside of the gates and waited as the other people inside the gates would not let them in. The people of Johnstown had kept the people outside of Johnstown out for far too long, and they could not allow them to come in. All of our things that we have in here are precious to us. If we let you in, you will take them. The people outside of Johnstown replied, but we need to go in there. We need your supplies so we can live. And so, both peoples were in an impasse. And so the siege began. It started in November, when they forced all the traders to turn away. And it continued on through December, through the cold winter. January, February, March, the people outside Johnstown, they suffered. They suffered many losses of people and resources and animals. The people inside began to suffer as well. They were better stocked, but they were beginning to get a little cabin feverish. Fights broke out. People were hurt by each other. Things were at an impasse, to be sure. Soon the spring came, the thaw, and the people outside of Johnstown fared better because they could go out and farm and fish, while people inside suffered so much. It didn't look very good for either side, and both sides had prepared their armies for a final siege. When one little girl snuck outside of the wall into the people outside of Johnstown, and she said, "Why do we have to fight?" And the people outside of Johnstown had their reasons, and they defined them, and they pointed them out to her. But they didn't make any sense to her. And then so she crawled back underneath the wall to all of her people and said, "I've been outside the wall and I talked to them, and I don't think they know why we're fighting. Why are we fighting?" And the people inside the Johnstown wall said, but they couldn't quite figure out the reason either. And so, a couple days later, the gates opened, and there was the little girl who stood between the two armies, the two peoples who had hated each other, who despised each other. And she looked at both sides and said, "Now we have to come together. Now it's time. Whatever was done in the past is over." And in that one moment, this little girl had become so wise. Perhaps she was touched by a higher power. Perhaps she had been born to do this. But her words carried weight. And the two groups of people mingled and resolved their differences and celebrated. And so every year, that little girl was celebrated until the day she died, and long after that, with a statue erected for her, standing between the gates, but bridging two peoples. The end.